Have you ever accidentally deleted something on your device and wished you could undo your mistake? Wouldn't it be great if you had a time machine to go back and undo your mistake? While humans can't yet travel back in time, programmers working on projects can do something quite like it. They do this using a system called version control. As a programmer, you'll be working with many files in your project, and it's important to keep track of the changes being made. Version control is a system that records all changes and modifications to files for tracking purposes and is essential to your day-to-day development activities. In this course, you will become familiar with version control and how it relates to development. By the end of your studies, you'll understand what version control is, how it works, and how it is used. There are both centralized and distributed control systems available, and you'll examine the different types of workflows available. Conflict resolution is an important aspect of version control, as it helps users manage file and version conflict issues. You'll get to explore popular methods of version tracking using version control technologies like Git and GitHub, and you will learn how to create and clone a repository in GitHub. In addition, you will become familiar with Git concepts such as add, commit, push and pull, branching and forking, diff, and blame. As well as focusing on version control, the course also explores the use of command line syntax with an emphasis on Unix commands. There are many videos in your course that will gradually guide you toward that goal. Watch, pause, rewind, and rewatch the videos until you are confident in your skills. Then you'll be able to consolidate your knowledge by consulting the course readings and put your skills into practice during the course exercises. Along the way, you'll encounter several knowledge quizzes where you can self-check your progress. You're not alone in considering a career as a web developer, and the course discussion prompts enable you to connect with your classmates. It's a great way to share knowledge, discuss difficulties, and make new friends. To help you be successful in the course, it's a great idea to commit to a regular and disciplined approach to your learning regime. You need to be as serious as you can about your study, and if possible, map out a study schedule with dates and times that you can devote to attending the course. Of course, this is an online self-paced program, and you can study at dates, times, and places that suit your lifestyle. However, it may help to think of your study in terms of regular attendance, just as you might have to do at a physical learning institute. You may have encountered new technical words and terminology in this video. Don't worry if you don't fully understand all these terms right now. Everything you need will be covered during your learning. In summary, this course provides you with a complete introduction to version control, and it is part of a program of courses that lead you toward a career in software development.
Communication is the most important skill for collaborating with other developers to ensure that you're on the same page when you're building products, and also so that people are keeping track of each other's timelines and the understanding of what the product requirements are consistent. Hi, I'm Layla Rizvi. I am a backend software engineer at Instagram working on Instagram calling in San Francisco. Effective collaboration is important so that we can move cohesively together on large projects with people that have a wide range of skills. As engineers actually have to collaborate with one another a lot. When we build features together, we have to work in parallel with one another to design the best features for our users. We also have to collaborate with a lot of non-engineers a lot. For example, when we built Instagram Live, we had to work with our product managers to figure out what we should build. We had to work with our user researchers to figure out what areas we should focus on to build the best products for our users. We had to work with our designers to figure out the right look and feel for our product. And we had to work as engineers to figure out what we can actually build in the timeline that we had. Communication is one of the most important skills for working with other developers. Learning how to give developers the right amount of context for what they're working on. Learning how to ruthlessly prioritize your work is also very important as a software engineer. There's always going to be an endless amount of things that you can do to improve your product. Learning which things are most important to unblock other developers or unblock yourself is the most important skill. The last thing that's really important to learn as a software developer is to accurately estimate your products. When you first start out, it'll be a little bit tricky, but over time, learning how to say how long a project's going to take and being able to explain the trade-offs is going to be very critical. The skills you need as a software developer changes from company to company a little bit. When you're at a big company like Meta, engineers are much more specialized, whereas if you're in a startup, you wear many different hats. As an engineer at Meta, we have to learn to be able to give just the right amount of context to people for what we need to get done, because we're working with people with little context on the work we're doing. There's so many engineers there. But if you're in a startup, people generally have a little more context on what you're working on, but they might not be as specialized in that area. So you have to do a little bit more learning potentially, and you have to maybe give less context to them. Some challenges I've encountered while learning to collaborate is that I have to learn how to adjust how I work with different people depending on their work preferences. Some people I work with are visual learners, so I learn to whiteboard when I'm talking to them. Some people I work with like to think before they speak, so I learn to be a little more patient when I'm talking to them, to listen to them. A skill that I'm working on learning to develop my own career is I'm learning how to work on mobile. I'm a back-end engineer and I work with mobile engineers every single day to better build products for them. It's nicer for me to understand how they operate, how their code base works, so that we can build better things together. To learn mobile, I took an Android bootcamp class at Meta that Meta provided for backend engineers interested in learning mobile. And after I finished the course, the Android engineers on my team have been giving me small tasks and small projects for me to drive so that I can learn a little bit more about how they work. Practicing effective version control leads to better collaboration because it helps you understand why certain changes were made if you look at a commit. It also helps you context switch between different features or projects that you're working on. Effective collaboration led to a better outcome on a recent project of mine. I'm a backend engineer and I was driving the backend parts of a key project for my team. I had to unexpectedly take time off, but I had a lot of clear commits for my code changes in Git, and I had a lot of documentation for my team, so they were able to easily pick up where I left off, and the project ended up staying on track. You should keep learning to collaborate with other people because the more people you work with, the better products you build, because you'll get different perspectives on what you're building. It's rewarding because your product that you're working on ends up being better. The more people you work with, the more people you can learn from. And ultimately, it's rewarding because the product that you build is going to be better because it's going to have a lot more different input and a lot more different perspectives for how it should be built.
Have you ever worked on a document, made changes to it, and wished you could have gone back to your first version a few days later? Can you remember that feeling of wishing you could travel back in time? For developers, this time machine exists, and it's called version control. In this video, you'll learn about version control's primary features and benefits. Version control is a system that records all changes and modifications to files for tracking purposes. Developers also use the terms source control or source code management. The primary goal of any version control system is to keep track of changes. It achieves this by allowing developers access to the entire change history with the ability to revert or roll back to a previous state or point in time. There are different types of changes, such as adding new files, modifying or updating files, and deleting files. The version control system is the source of truth across all code, assets, and the team itself. Let me give you an example that we're all familiar with. In word processing applications, version control functionality is available to provide users with a safety net of autosaving the document. The application creates a restoration point on each autosave to which the user can revert if required. Version control systems for coding projects tend to be a bit more complex, but their underlying functionality follows the same process. Working as a developer, you'll need to become familiar with many different tools, and version control is one of them. For developers, especially those working in a team, there are many benefits associated with version control. These include revision history, identity, collaboration, automation, and efficiency. Let's explore these in some more detail. Revision history provides a record of all changes in a project. It provides developers with the ability to revert to a stable point in time in cases where code edits cause issues or bugs. The ability to roll back to a particular version or time allows teams to work faster and deliver code with more confidence. Keeping a record of changes is great, but it doesn't have as much value if you don't know who is responsible for adding or changing a record. All changes made are always recorded with the identity of the user that made them. Combining this feature with the revision history allows teams to see not only when the changes occurred, but also who made the changes. Teams can also analyze the editing, creation, and the deletion of files on the control system. As a software developer, you will often work with a team to achieve a common goal. This can be adding new features to an existing project or creating a brand new service. In all cases, a version control system allows the team to submit their code and keep track of any changes that need to be made. Another important aspect of a version control system is something called a peer review. Developers working on a task create a peer review once the code is ready for inspection. The peer review aims to get other developers on your team to review the code and provide feedback where necessary. The ability to create and deliver code on a wide scale is complex and time-consuming. Version control helps keep track of all changes. It plays an integral role in the explosion of development operations, or DevOps, as it's commonly called. DevOps is a set of practices, philosophies, and tools that increase an organization's ability to deliver applications or services to a high quality and velocity. Version control is a key tool in this process, and it is used not only to track all changes, but also to aid in software quality, release, and deployments. You, as a developer, will usually work on a project alongside many developers and team members with other skill sets. You and your team need to be efficient to make your project a success. You and your team may work using processes from the Agile methodology. In an Agile process, a team normally plan and execute 2 weeks of work to complete, which is called an iteration. Each iteration has a list of tasks to complete before the 2 weeks ends. These tasks, while complex in some cases, are aided by having version control in place. If you would like to learn more about the Agile methodology, there is a link to an additional reading at the end of this lesson. Testing and having some level of automation on every task introduced allows the team to be more efficient. It also ensures more confidence that any new feature being introduced will not break any existing flows. You now know what version control is all about. Great work! Now that you have a better understanding of the goals and benefits of version control, you are ready to learn how to start using it.
An interesting fact about collaborating on projects at Meta is that engineers drive every project at Meta. They're in charge of coordinating with product, data scientists, researchers on what we're building and the timelines for that, whereas in other companies, product managers or leadership is often in charge of each project. I'm Layla Rizvi. I'm a backend software engineer on Instagram Calling in San Francisco. In this video, I hope you learn that effective collaboration is important for engineer success at Meta, and learning how to use version control at Meta is also very important. As a backend engineer on Instagram Calling, for my role, I collaborate with other mobile engineers in my department on a daily basis so that we build the best products together. I also collaborate with Instagram messaging a lot because calling and messaging are closely tied. I also work with non-engineers like product and data scientists regularly as well. To collaborate effectively with my coworkers, we message each other on chat to unblock one another, but when something warrants a meeting, we'll schedule a meeting. When something warrants a document, we collaborate together on a document with comments and leave notes for one another. Version control for Instagram is interesting because we have one giant monolithic repository for all of our code for backend. That means that whenever I'm making a change, the code that I'm writing in is shared with every other Instagram team. It is risky in some ways, but it's also nice in others, so I can reuse their code. The other thing that's interesting about version control at Meta is that any engineer can approve any change. At Meta, they're big on this saying that nothing at Meta is someone else's problem. So that means that any engineer can actually work on any change that they want to work on. Version control at Meta is a little different than version control at a lot of other places. While Meta has a giant monolithic repository for our code where we continuously release our code, many other companies have smaller repositories called microservices for each team. So each team has their own code base and only they work in it. They use branches so that they can take their code and merge it back with like the master branch for their team or product. This is great for smaller teams in some ways, but it has its cons in that you might run into a lot of merge conflicts at Meta because we have so many engineers. There would be too many merge conflicts if we had branches for each team in the company. Some collaboration challenges for version control on my team is that because we use a monolithic repository, merge conflicts happen a lot. So we try to write smaller changes so that we can easily revert them. We also try to add a lot of gatekeepers so that if we ship something to production on Instagram, we can easily turn it off without waiting for any rollback. We also share our code with Messenger calling. So we also have to add a lot of tests so Messenger doesn't break us. Git blame is a way for us to look at the revision history for files. It helps us so that if I'm looking at a line of code and I don't understand it, I can figure out who wrote that code and reach out to them. I can also figure out what they were trying to do in that code. They write a message saying what the change was for. It's also great so that I can figure out what change to revert if I'm trying to revert a change. I use it every single day. When I need to understand what some code is doing, I'll reach out to the point of contact that wrote that code, which is especially helpful at Meta where there's so many engineers. I often don't know the person I need to get a hold of, so seeing their code helps. In this video, I hope you learn that learning how to work together effectively and collaborating well as learning how to use version control effectively is critical for success at Meta. Getting a diverse set of perspectives on what features you should build, who you should build for, what a feature might need or how it can improve is really helpful. And the rewarding part is that your end result, your project, ends up being better.
As a developer working in a team, you are continually writing, changing, or updating existing source code. It may happen that while you are working on a new feature, another developer in the team is busy fixing an unrelated bug. With multiple developers all working in the same code base, keeping track of all of those additional updates can be problematic. Luckily, version control addresses these kinds of problems. In this video, you will discover the different types of version control systems, learn how they operate, and learn about their similarities and differences. There are many different version control systems available. For example, Subversion, Perforce, AWS Code Commit, Mercurial, and Git, to name a few. Version control systems can be split into two types or categories: centralized version control systems and distributed version control systems. Both types are quite similar, but they also have some key differences which set them apart from each other. Let's start with centralized version control systems. Centralized version control systems, or CVCS for short, contain a server and a client. The server contains the main repository that houses the full history of versions of the code base. Developers working on projects using a centralized system need to pull down the code from the server to their local machine. This gives the user their own working copy of the code base. The server holds the full history of changes. The client has the latest code, but every operation needs to have a connection to the server itself. In a centralized version control system, the server is the central copy of the project. After making changes to the code, the developer needs to push the changes to the central server so that other developers can see them. This essentially means that viewing the history of changes requires that you are connected to the server in order to retrieve and view them. Now let's discover how distributed version control systems work. Distributed version control systems, or DVCS for short, are similar to the centralized model. You still need to pull code down from the server to view the latest changes. The key difference is that every user is essentially a server and not a client. This means that every time you pull down code from the distributed model, you have the entire history of changes on your local system. Now that you know a little about CVCS and DVCS, let's explore some of the advantages and disadvantages of each. The advantage of CVCS is that they're considered easier to learn than their distributed counterparts. They also give more access controls to users. The disadvantage is that they can be slower, given that you need to establish a connection to the server to perform any actions. With DVCS, you don't need to be connected to the server to add your changes or view a file's history. It works as if you were actually connected to the server directly. but on your own local machine. You only ever need to connect to the server to pull down the latest changes or to push your own changes. It essentially allows users to work in an offline state. Speed and performance are also better than its CVCS counterpart. DVCS is a key factor in improving developer operations and the software development lifecycle. You will learn more about DVCS later in this course. And there you have it. You can now differentiate between a centralized and a distributed version control system. You also learned how they operate and what their benefits are. As an aspiring developer, I'm sure you can appreciate the importance of version control systems. Well done. I'd like you to think back to a time when you thought you'd lost work because it had been overwritten or deleted. As you have previously learned, version control and version control systems help developers keep track of their code and up to date with any changes. In this video, you'll get a feel for how developers use version control to keep track of changes and resolve coding conflicts. When working with a team of developers, it's essential for the code base to have a source of truth that has all historical changes. Version control systems play an integral part in aiding this process by providing a full history of changes of every single file added to its repository. It makes collaboration across a team easier and also aids in working toward a common goal. Whether it is adding new features and following the flow of how they were implemented, or discovering where a potential issue may have been introduced, being able to accurately pinpoint the who, the when, and the what of those changes is paramount. The revision history will record the essential data points so any developer or team member can walk through the entire project from start to its current state. Every change that has occurred on the project should be easily accessible, either by a simple command or integration into the developer's IDE. It's important for organizations to define standards for how developers communicate changes they make. Developers need to know prior to looking at the code what the lead developer's aims are. The more information, the better, and this creates a stronger team environment that is more transparent and open. Now I will guide you through an example of a typical development team working on an e-commerce application. Suppose you're working in a team with 3 other developers to release a new feature. You've been tasked with creating a new feature to enable experiments on the website. This will allow the marketing department to test user behavior. A daily report is generated that ranks the effectiveness of each experiment. The reports will give insights into how each experiment is doing. They will then provide the results of which experiment is the most successful and overall winner. After all the code changes, the developer will push their changes to the repository and create something called a pull request. Developers will then peer review the pull request to approve, request changes, or decline. When working on a single project, there's usually some level of crossover between the developers. When this does occur, the history of revisions can help aid the developers in seeing the full life cycle of changes that have occurred. It is also essential for merging conflicts where multiple developers have made changes that may need to be resolved prior to the code being approved. The history will show who made the change, for what reason, the code itself and its changes, and the date and time of when they occurred. Typically, on a new project, you will encounter changes in one task that may cause potential issues or conflicts with another. The history of revisions will give the team the ability to manage and merge these changes and deliver the business objectives in a timely manner. Well done! You've now learned about the history of revisions. Remember, it's vital to have a system in place to keep a record of all changes to the code base. This is critical when working with a team of other developers. You should now be able to describe how developers use version control to fix any conflicts that may occur during production. Well done! You've reached the end of this introductory module on software collaboration. It's now time to review what you've learned during these lessons. This module started with a case study about how software engineers collaborate across the globe without wrecking one another's code. You then began to explore the answer to the question, what is version control? You learned to describe how modern software teams collaborate and work on the same code base, list different version control systems, explain different version control methodologies, and explored software development workflows. You learned about the history of version control and that it has been in use before the internet was widely adopted. You explored conflict resolution and discovered the important role of version control in the software development process. You learned about some of the common tools and strategies developers use to implement version control, such as workflow, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment. The differences between staging and production were explored, and you learned that the staging environment should mimic your production environment. You also learned the many areas that benefit from creating a staging environment, including new features, testing, migrations, and configuration changes. You learned that any issues should be caught and fixed in the staging environment before going live in production. You have also explored downtime, vulnerabilities, and reputation regarding production. You should now be familiar with version control. Well done! You're making good progress on your learning journey.